Welcome back to Coaching with the Bible. This is episode 86, season 2, episode 32. The reading this week here in Israel is the portion of Emor, and our topic this week is respect. Yes, R-E-S-P-E-C-T, respect. We won't get to singing the Aretha Franklin song here today in the podcast, nor will we actually look at the words of that song, but the term is a key term. It comes up a lot. It's super important. I think it's fundamental to so much of what ails society today and what can actually heal a lot of society today is the concept of respect. Respect would normally go along with something like trust, mistrust, disrespect. Those things sort of go together, and they're at the root cause of many things that are problematic in the world in which we live in. The source of the respect issue this week specifically comes to us by way of a passage in the Talmud that relates to a commandment that appears in this week's portion. So that was sort of a roundabout way of saying the following, which is this. One of the commandments that's listed in this week's portion within the section on the holidays is the idea of the counting of the Omer. I don't know a particular way to translate Omer into English, but it's the period of time between Passover and the Pentecost, the holiday of Shavuot. It's a 7-week time frame that we are commanded to count both the days and the weeks between those two events. So the holiday of Passover is the beginning of it. It starts on the second day of the holiday, and it ends with the onset of the holiday known as Shavuot, which commemorates and celebrates the giving of the law, the giving of the Bible, and the Ten Commandments on Mt Sinai 7 weeks later. And so the commandment is that each day we count both the days and the weeks leading up. It's supposed to be very celebratory. One would imagine that it is. Very exciting and high time. And we're preparing for the giving of the law again and again and again. But the reality of it is in our community is that we also know that it's actually a rather tragic time, and that the Talmud tells us in the tractate known as Yevamot, it's actually going to be, I think, this week, that this page is going to be read on page 62b, the story of the students of Rabbi Akiva, and the notion, the idea, and the history that the students of Rabbi Akiva died during this period of time. 24,000 students, the Talmud tells us, died during this period of time. And the reason the Talmud gives us that they died, as a plague, basically, right, was that they did not show proper respect for one another. That's the reason. As you imagine today, God forbid, that an influencer with thousands upon thousands upon thousands of followers, that all of the followers would pass away in a very short period of time, leaving simply just the influencer around. That's sort of like the equivalent. Rabbi Akiva is, for lack of a better term, a legend in our faith. He is a power personality. His impact for all of history with respect to the teaching of Bible and Torah law, Jewish law, fundamental principles. He's everything. And so when his students die, it's sort of like a shocking reality that so many students die, and they die for that reason, a lack of respect. The sort of twisted irony is also that Rabbi Akiva is also famous for having said that loving your neighbor as yourself is a great lesson in Torah, in Bible. The fundamental principle, the idea of love thy neighbor, which is a biblical precept, Rabbi Akiva says is the number one precept, and yet all of his students die, they perish in this plague at that time. So I wanted to key in on this notion of respect. As always here in Coaching with the Bible, we're not going to get to all of it. But let's think about this for a minute. How does that happen that the disciples of a great rabbi, who are spending, let's say, all their time studying in his presence, studying at his feet, listening to him, hearing him talk and give lectures, and teach. It's being around that kind of a personality. How does it happen? A, that they have no respect for each other, they lack respect for each other. And B, how does it happen potentially that the teacher doesn't know, simply not aware that that's going on? So to some degree, let's start with B. It's possible that in the course of their study, in the manner in which they're studying together in pairs, so maybe it's not obvious, right? Maybe it's not obvious that this behavior is going on, or this lack of behavior is going on, this lack of respect, this disrespect is happening. That could be that we're not paying attention to it, and we're not attuned, we're not tied in to that level of specificity or of, a person to really know all of it. That's possible. It's possible also that there's another priority. Maybe the priority is knowledge, sort of mastery of subject matter is priority. And so we put other things secondary, tertiary. We don't even think about them. They don't even come across our mind as we're doing something. Or it could be that wasn't yet the priority idea, that we have to, love thy neighbor that way. I saw it many years ago in a book written by a teacher of mine. It was his contention that Rabbi Akiva came upon that idea that love thy neighbor is the fundamental precept after his students perished. That perhaps he had a different priority set. Not that it wasn't a priority, but maybe it was a secondary priority. And then he flipped it over and realized that respect, or loving of others, loving other humans, was number one. Could be. But it's so hard to imagine that could possibly happen. We know that it did. So how does that happen? There's a lot of literature and a lot of articles and conversations around specifically the students of Rabbi Akiva, but also just in general. When we separate it out from that context and put it into the general context of society and culture around us, this sort of sense of a lack of civility seems to me to be obvious. Right? It's always there. It's always present. The lack of respect. Now, I taught for a lot of years, and the idea that in my classroom that a student wouldn't be respectful, albeit I didn't like it, but I sort of expected that at certain points and at certain moments that would be true. Certainly in the rabbinate, I had that sense as well, that there would be occasion where people would show a lack of respect. Again, sometimes surprising, never liked it, but can sort of understand that maybe in certain moments that's the case. You say something they don't like, you decide a question in a manner that they don't appreciate, you take a position that they disagree with, and maybe it comes back at you in some level of disrespect. Again, you don't have to love it, you don't have to like it, but maybe you can expect it. But when it's sort of societal, across the spectrum, then obviously something deeper at root is going on. In the same way that maybe was the case in that Talmudic statement about the students of Rabbi Akiva, that there was something root, there was sort of a corruption at the core. Something at the core was rotten, and therefore it showed itself this way. So there's a lot of ways to sort of understand it. So how does disrespect happen? Where does disrespect come from? So a lot of the literature will tell you that disrespect will come from the idea that the person themselves lacks respect for themselves. And by virtue of the fact that a person doesn't have their own sense of self-respect, they show disrespect, or they behave in a manner that's disrespectful to others. And it just simply leads itself and bleeds itself to a space well beyond the scope of themselves. And so the idea that self-respect and respect go hand in hand shouldn't surprise us. if we respect others, others will respect us. That shouldn't surprise us. But the reality of it is, in a lot of cases, with a lot of people, they simply don't have it. They don't have it. And so because they don't have it themselves, it's hard for them to show it in other places as well. And so one of the things that happens a lot of the time with people with respect to, with the, I'm just going to be careful with my words on the use of the word respect, is the idea that we lose sight of the individual. One of the possibilities that happens is with the ability for a human to diminish another human being by showing a lack of respect, being disrespectful, is when they no longer view that person as valuable, as having any value, as having any credit, as having any sort of superiority or strength or quality of being that's unique and special and different, maybe even better than ourselves. So by virtue of sort of laying that land flat and removing all of the uniqueness of an individual, we stop seeing them as an individual, we stop seeing them as a person, and then it's easy for us to not only disrespect them, but to do even worse than disrespect them, obviously. And so if we're in a mode, perhaps, let's say in a situation where it's an academic environment or a place of study, and mastery of a subject is the number one thing, so I'm just simply there to gain knowledge. However I get that knowledge, the more knowledge I have, the better I am, perhaps the less I see of you. Or less, in the manner I see you less. I see you as less than. And that's a problem. And so by then having that sense of disrespect, what ends up happening is that you create a sense of fear, anger, shame, confusion, self-doubt, depression. I mean, a whole host of ailments and issues and problems for the other person. And so it stems from you. It stems from the person themselves. When we're in that space, that really is sort of for ourselves, we lack our own respect. There's a lack of self-respect in that place. And by virtue of that, we're able to put ourselves in a position to show a lack of respect with other people. That's how that happens. We see it a lot. You see it with kids. You see it with people on the street. You see it with colleagues at work. It shows itself maybe differently in a modern environment than it does in other places, but there are a lot of ways in which disrespect is shown. You know, when I was a teacher, so maybe it was snickering or it was a comment behind my back. It was a note from one student passed to another or something that's overheard in the hallway. I remember at a certain point when I was teaching early on, I was fairly young as a teacher, and my students stopped calling me rabbi. They would just call me by my first name. And that just wasn't done in that school. So you were, Mr. or Miss so-and-so, or Rabbi so-and-so, Dr. so-and-so. That's the way the respect was shown. But by removing sort of the prefix, right, the title, and simply calling you by a name, first name or last name, that was trying to bring you down. There's a power dynamic that exists there. And in many cases with certain students, it was the ability to try to bring the teacher down, which is what they were looking for, to equal the playing field or to diminish and step up the ladder by stepping on top of somebody else. We know that a lot. We see that a lot. A lot of that's also true today. That was 20 years ago, but it's still true today. And so what happens is that you get this rise in disrespect. And then when the person themselves does not then command respect back or operate in a manner of respect at a very high level, then it persists. We allow it to persist by ignoring it. In some cases, we allow it to grow and to metastasize into something far worse than it actually needs to be. The research is clear that when people feel, this is this direct quote from a research study on the subject of social deviance based on respect and disrespect, People feel that they're being viewed negatively by others simply because they belong to a particular gender, a particular race, or other group membership. They come away with the impression that others do not treat them respectfully, which in turn makes them more likely to engage in social deviance. The sense being that people behave a certain way because they're treated a certain way. They're viewed a certain way. And so it's super important that we appreciate the idea of respect for others, and perhaps respect for others by first and foremost having respect for ourselves. And so let's talk about that for a second. The first part is how we show up in these situations. What's the manner in which we present ourselves? What are we teaching other people with respect to how they're going to be allowed to treat us and speak to us? How does that work? Perhaps it is in the current moment that we have to be very explicit about what's okay and what's not okay, what we'll accept and what we won't accept. The manner in which we say that to people might be important also. So first and foremost is the idea that we have to be worthy of respect. It seems sort of obvious and silly to even say it out loud, but it's important that certainly in a work environment that people who are new to us are trying to figure out how do they want us to handle this. So we want to present ourselves in a certain way that's professional, obviously, then polished, and includes sort of the social vibe about how we want to be treated and not accept any less. And so in the event that the first instance happens where a person is disrespectful to us in a work environment, let's say we're a new boss, and again, there's a power dynamic there, or we're a new member of an elite team or a senior team, and there's that question, a sort of discomfort about how does this go, we need to be intentional and clear about it. The second thing goes when we start to actually open our mouths and speak. This one is super duper important. No more qualifiers. If you are in the room, then you deserve to be in the room. Don't apologize for being in the room. I remember many years ago, I was at a board meeting for an organization that I was working with, and the senior member of one of the professional teams at one of the institutions was invited to the board meeting. The person didn't come to board meetings that often, and when he had the opportunity to speak, he would always qualify his opening statements with something, I'm not usually at a board meeting like this, or pardon me for not knowing sort of the etiquette on this, I'm not usually at these meetings, I'm sorry to interrupt, and I apologize for sharing, all these things. And it immediately diminished whatever it was that he had to say. So he was playing into the sense that he didn't belong in the room. To which afterward I pulled him aside and said very clearly, you belong in that room. Your opinion is important and it's valuable. Treat it as such. Say it as such. He thanked me. It never happened again. The third thing here is to stop downplaying your success. If you're a successful person, you came into a new environment, and there is a talk about you in your former role and what you're bringing to this space or what you've accomplished so far, it's okay. It's okay for you to be, for a moment, just a little bit of a big deal. I think that's okay. It's not an issue about humility here. We've talked a lot about humility here. I stay humble, of course. But the idea that you didn't succeed or you haven't had success doesn't work. It plays into the notion that you're diminishing yourself, and by diminishing yourself, you're also therefore diminishing the level of respect that you are expecting from other people. And so play that up. So that's on side one, is the personal side of the self-respect. I will be treated a certain way. I expect to be treated a certain way. I'm going to behave in a manner that projects a message that I'm only going to accept being treated in a certain manner. That's my self-respect. It's huge. When we come from a place of scarcity or a place of lack or a place of not enough, so all that goes out the window, and then we don't have it, and then we wonder why we don't get it back. We don't wonder why people don't treat us a certain way. On the other side of that is, of course, being respectful to others. So if we obviously have an expectation for ourselves, then we should expect that that goes two ways. And the clearest, simplest way to think about how to be respectful to others and we're not always mindful of it, is first and foremost to really be mindful of it. It is important. If it's not natural to us, for whatever reason, no judgment on that, to show a lot of respect to people when we first meet them, and we have to work on it, then we should work on it. Again, whether that's for selfish reasons because we want it back, or simply because we want to be better as a person. So the first thing is to really, I think, begin with a really open mind about other people. If we shut down their opinions, once they start to say them, they will stop saying them. They will get the sense that you do not respect or value their opinion, and they will sense from you that you are a fairly disrespectful person, even if you don't intend to be. It also makes it impossible for those relationships to grow. And so if you want to really show respect to others, a little bit of dignity. Listen to them. Let them feel respected, even if you don't think their opinion has any value. Let them feel that it is. And try to actually be open to the respectful nature of what you have to be in that moment and listen. So if you're having a conversation with someone and you're on your phone at the same moment, it doesn't work. If you're reading text messages or you're tapping out a message to somebody else while someone's sharing an opinion with you, that is, I think people accept in that, I think it's okay, and I do it too, I'm guilty as well, I think it's fairly disrespectful. When you say to somebody, just give me 1 second and I'll get back to you, and then it's 10 minutes later, it's pretty disrespectful. When you don't care about people's time, so you're late for an appointment, you keep them waiting for an extended period of time for a meeting, you don't apologize, you don't let them know in advance, all that stuff. So you show you just simply don't respect their time, and therefore there's a sense that you don't respect them as people. In some cases, if you don't take into consideration their opinion on a certain matter, if they're an expert on a subject, or they have an opinion, and generally speaking it is valued, but for whatever reason you don't, that person senses being disrespected, intentional or otherwise. So the first thing here is to really be open. The second thing is to really seek common ground with people. Find a space where you and this other person, who generally speaking you have nothing to do with maybe, or you don't always agree with, but you can find some common ground. So you can look at them as equals, at least minimally on one subject. The third one, which is really hard, but it's one we talked about a lot at the beginning of Coaching with the Bible, we can talk about here for just a minute, and I know I'm running a lot longer than I usually do, is to really listen carefully and closely to what people are saying. Lean in, show that you care, show that you heard what they said, check for understanding, make sure it's clear what it is that their person's opinion is, again, before sharing your own. And the idea then, of course, before, trying to be understood, the quote, I think it is, before, when seeking to be understood, first seek understanding. I think that's what it is. Something to that effect. The idea here is that you're trying to build connection and trust and relationship with somebody else. Perhaps, again, it's a work relationship where the idea here is that it's to be, to build success together. And so we have to seek understanding. We have to be curious. We have to be open. We have to be listening. We have to be more empathetic. We can't sense that we feel like we know everything. So many of us, I think, believe that we are know-it-alls at this point because we have access to literally all the information in the world and all the knowledge that's in front of us. Clearly, except for actual human behavior and how to behave in certain moments. So it's important that we establish where the respect boundaries are. What becomes part of what is part of the respectful relationship. What is expected of us in these relationships. Truth and honesty and dignity. Value. All those things that come with it. And so here, what we're talking about here on two sides of this is the self-respect aspect. So person for themselves on side one. And then the expectation that on side two comes the other aspect of it, which is the respect of others. as I said at the beginning, I think so many things that are not good in society right now, that are really suffering in society right now, suffer very much from a corruption of the character trait of respect. I think trust is also there, but we're not going to do trust today. And so it's important for us to do the work, to really do the work, especially now in an environment in which we're in now, where there's a lack of it. The fact that someone disagrees with you, the fact that their opinion is different than yours, their opinions are not the person. We can separate a person from their actions, and on some level we can separate a person from their opinions. And we can be respectful, and we can be grateful, and we can be appreciative of who they are, even when we disagree with what it is that they have to say. We can disagree without being disagreeable. I think that's the quote. We can be respectful in every single moment with other people, even when it is that we disagree with 100% of the things that they have to say. That is Coaching with the Bible for this week. Look forward to seeing you next week.